Okay, so the world's largest cocktail party is this weekend. Yes, the Georgia Bulldogs versus Florida. And this is not a game that I have paid a whole lot of attention to in the past, but this one intrigues me this year because the Georgia Bulldogs have not brought their A game every game this year. But the Florida Gators, they might be looking to make a resurgence, and this could be the game that puts Billy Napier on the map for the Florida Gators as their newest head coach in his second year. But guys, before we talk about it, before we break it down, I really want to hear from y'all. So make sure you jump down in those comments below. Let me know what y'all's thoughts are. And if you haven't already, the normal housekeeping. And if you're new to the show, we call it the housekeeping. Hit that like and hit that subscribe button. But we got to talk about the history of this game before we dive into the game itself. This is the 102nd matchup between these two teams. Georgia's on a 2-game win streak. Georgia is winning this rivalry 54-44 with only 2 ties in this rivalry. Georgia has the largest margin of victory, 75-0 in 1942. Woo! Could you imagine losing to your rival 75-0? Couldn't be me. They're both Florida and Georgia are tied at 7 for longest win streak, and Florida's largest margin of victory is 47-7 as well. You look at the history between the two programs. Hey, you know what? If you're younger, you remember the Florida of the 2008 and the 2009 era where they were going to the national championships, but they're not as dominant as Georgia has been, where Georgia has 15 conference championships, 4 national championships, the all-time record, 61 bowl games, 875 all-time wins, a bowl record of .631, consensus All-Americans of 39, 654 weeks in the AP poll, 46 weeks at AP number 1, while Florida's only got 3 squares, right? 3 Heisman winners, 373 NFL draft picks, and 58 first-round NFL draft picks. So Georgia has been the more dominant program in the SEC over Florida. Now, going into the game this week, all of those stats I just read you got to throw them out the door. Nothing matters in a rivalry game because guys are going to show up, and sometimes you have guys step up in these games that you don't know who they are or don't expect them to show up. Maybe they're not fully healthy, but they go out there and they ball out. That's how a rivalry game is played. That's what happens. So, Florida versus Georgia. Let's take a look at the matchup here. Obviously, myself, everybody else, ESPN, they're going to favor Georgia here. The 2-time defending national championships have an 85.2% chance to win this game, only giving the Gators a 14.8% chance to win. The Georgia Bulldogs coming in at 7-0, the Gators coming in at 5-2. Here's the deal, though. The 2 losses by the Florida Gators come to Utah, who is, I believe, 6 or 7-1. Have one of the best defenses in the country, and then they lost to Kentucky. So, in reality, they've played some pretty good teams. They've lost to some pretty good teams. They beat Tennessee. You beat South Carolina, who also gave Georgia a run for their money. This is going to be the big test. This is where we're going to get to see what Billy Napier's team is made out of, because the Georgia Bulldogs have not played their best this season. Go look at their schedule. Like I said, South Carolina, they had to come back from behind. Auburn, that was a close game. They only won it 27-20. Vanderbilt even tested Georgia through the air. And this is where the Gators might be able to have an advantage. So I go down here and I look at their season leaders. And I want to start by prefacing this. The Georgia Bulldogs are going to be without Brock Bowers. Carson Beck has, I'm not going to say relied on Brock Bowers all season, because he has distributed the ball to other wide receivers. I mean, you go look at the statistics for the Georgia Bulldogs. You see guys like Marcus Rosemary Jake Saint with 333 receiving yards. Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas, remember both those guys in the transfer portal, 282 for Lovett, 256 for Ra. So He's obviously done a good job at distributing the ball. I believe you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 guys over 100 yards. You have one guy that's scratching 100-yard territory in receiving. So he's done a good job there. The question is, in this game, in one of the biggest games of the year, where Carson Beck has had a guy kind of like, I want to say the Chiefs. Look at what Patrick Mahomes has in Travis Kelce. When he needs to get the ball down the field, he's looking to Travis Kelce because he knows Travis Kelce is the reliable option. I know we have a lot of OU fans that watch the show. Dylan Gabriel and Drake Stoops. When Dylan Gabriel needs a reliable option in the middle of the field to get 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 yards, they're giving it to Drake Stoops because they know he's a reliable option. That's what Brock Bowers is. Brock Bowers has been one of the most dominant tight ends in college football that I think we've seen in a long, long time. Shoot, he might even be one of the best. That's kind of the conversations that we're having now. And unfortunately, he goes down. I believe it's called tightrope surgery is what he's having to have on his ankle. He's probably going to be out quite a while. So the Georgia Bulldogs, this is the game where you can have a wide receiver step up and be that number one option for Carson Beck. That's what I'm watching here. But looking at the season leaders for both teams, passing, Georgia has the advantage if you look at just pure stats and what Carson Beck has been able to do. Similar completion percentages and attempts. 2,147 yards for Carson Beck, 1,897 for Graham Mertz. 12 touchdowns, 4 interceptions for Beck, 12 touchdowns, 2 interceptions for Graham Mertz. That tells me Graham Mertz takes care of the ball. Now, Graham Mertz, also not great with his feet, minus 51 yards on 41 carries. So, yeah, that's going to be a question there. Carson Beck, on the other hand, he is 28 carries, 50 yards. So, again, not very mobile in this game. You're not going to see the quarterbacks trying to make any designed run plays, taking it out of the pocket. But the question is, which team is going to be able to apply some pressure? And we'll get to that here in a second. But continuing to look at the offense. Rushing, again, very similar. 80 carries for Edwards, 460 yards, 6 touchdowns. For Johnson, you're looking at 85 carries, 438 yards, 4 touchdowns. However, I will give the advantage to Florida in the rushing game. Reason why is you also have a guy by the name of Trevor Etienne. Yes, you remember his brother, the guy who played at Clemson, now plays for the Jaguars? That guy. 69 carries, 407 yards, 5.9 average, 3 touchdowns. So Florida's got 2 guys that are in the 400-yard category here. So I'm going to give the advantage to Florida. Additionally, they have another guy in Trayon Webb, who, freshman, 146 yards on 22 carries, 6.6 average, 2 touchdowns. So I'm going to say Florida's got the advantage in the run game here. But Georgia's not a team that you're going to be able to run the ball down their throat. That's not how this is going to work. You're going to have to mix in play action plays or passes, and you're going to have to kill them through the air a little bit as well, especially if you want to get that run game going. Receiving yards, you're going to have to give the advantage to the Florida Gators here. Your leading receiver, if you're Georgia, is Brock Bowers of 41 receptions, 567 yards, 4 touchdowns. If you're the Florida Gators, you got Purcell, 44 receptions, 619 yards, 3 touchdowns. And again, we talked about the Georgia Bulldogs having 9 guys with over 100 yards of receiving, but it seems like the Gators, they kind of know who they are in the pass game. They know who their number one option is. That's Purcell. They got a rising star in Eugene Wilson III. So I like what the Gators have in the pass game in terms of receiving. Carson Beck's the better quarterback, but Graham Mertz, I think, has better weapons. So we'll have to kind of see how this one plays out on the offensive side of the ball. But I kind of want to talk about the defense a little bit, because we talked about how on the offensive side of the ball, these quarterbacks don't necessarily have designed run plays. They don't do a good job at it. So they're not using their feet. The question is, which team is going to be able to apply the most pressure? I'm going to run you through a couple stats here on where these guys are at in terms of rankings for defense. Total defense, Georgia's number 6. That's expected. Georgia's been one of the best defenses in the country. They still are, only allowing 262.6 yards a game, 4.39 yards per play. You know what? You like what the Georgia Bulldogs are doing. However, Florida's got the number 18th ranked defense. So they're not too far behind Georgia, only allowing 312.4 yards per game. So not too big of a difference there. This is where I think whoever wins in these two categories is going to win the game. Team sacks. Georgia is ranked number 103rd in the country with 1.71 sacks a game, only getting 12 sacks through 7 games. The Florida Gators, and I just had them pulled up here, and I completely lost them when I had that kind of cough. They're ranked the number 108th with 11 sacks, 1.57. So Georgia is one better. I'm not counting that as an advantage. Additionally, you look at teams' tackles for loss. It gets even worse for Georgia and Florida here. Georgia's number 90 with 132 tackle for loss yards at 37 tackles for loss. Florida, 35 tackles for loss. Again, not much of an advantage for Florida or for Georgia. My question is, if you're Florida and you can, in your front seven, can apply pressure to Georgia and you can get into that backfield and you can apply pressure to Carson Beck, meaning flush him out of the pocket, or you can get him sacked, you probably win this game. And vice versa goes for Georgia. You have to be able to apply pressure to Graham Mertz, and you have to be able to stop this Florida team in the backfield, especially with how well they're running the ball. Now, going back to the matchup here. Line, Georgia, 14.5. I like where they have it at Georgia by 2 scores. I don't like the number 14.5. I think this is going to be a closer game than a lot of people expect. And additionally, I think Georgia's on upset alert. I think although I'm picking Georgia, Florida very well could come out into this game and they could push Georgia around a little bit. I'm very curious to see how Georgia is able to replace Brock Bowers in this game. That's all something we're going to be watching. And Florida's the home team, right? They're going to have all the recruits. It's in Jacksonville, Florida. You'd imagine there might be a little bit more Gator fans there at the game. This will be a huge momentum shift for Florida if they're able to win it. However, it's hard to pick against the defending national champions, especially in a game like this. So I'm going to pick Georgia. I'm going to pick them by 2 scores. I'm going to pick them by 10. So score I've got, 34-24 Georgia. However, again, I want to preface this by saying I would not be shocked to see Florida win this game because Florida has the tools and the capabilities to go out there and pull off an upset. But I just have a hard time seeing it because Georgia, they're on a 24-game win streak. They're trying to capture 25. They're trying to go 6 of 7 over the past 7 games in this series. I kind of like where Georgia's at. But like I said, don't be shocked. So if you guys haven't already, make sure you hit that like. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you guys haven't already, go ahead, jump down in the comments below and give me your score